So I'm Daniel Gross. My new book, Better, Stronger, Faster, The Myth of American Decline and the Rise of a New Economy, is coming out in a couple of weeks from the Free Press, and it's being excerpted in this week's edition of Newsweek. So in 2009, after everything had gone to pieces and the stock market had fallen in half, we realized we had this economy built on housing and credit and debt, this consensus emerged. The U.S. was done. We had fallen and we can't get up. And everybody had a different reason. For the right, it was because Obama, a socialist, was in charge. And for the left, it was because the banks had ruined us and we weren't going to punish them. And the reality is that at that time, our policy was starting to go right. But more significantly, our private sector, which had fallen so deeply, was starting to do things right as well. And what we see now, rolling forward 3 years, is an economy that is larger than it was before the fall and is growing more rapidly than any of our peers in the developed world. American consumers, and in particular American companies, have figured out new ways to do things. They found new markets, they fixed their balance sheets, they found efficiencies. Failure begets failure, success begets success. So they kind of cleaned up their internal balance sheets. I use the example of Ford, big car company. It didn't go bankrupt, it didn't get a bailout. It had a huge amount of debt and it just ground out a recovery. It cut costs, it was tough on benefits and salary, that it negotiated. But mostly it found new ways to be profitable given the resources that they had. Their stock fell to $1.60 in 2009. It's risen almost tenfold. They've figured out how to do business in a more sustainable way. And there's sustainability. You talk about being more fuel efficient. So Walmart's trucking fleet now gets 30% more miles per gallon than it did. That takes out major costs. UPS has eliminated left turns. Their delivery trucks don't make left turns, and that enables them to be much more productive. But by sustainable, I also mean that they're no longer as dependent on people buying stuff with credit cards. We've seen a lot of new business models develop that revolve around renting goods and services to people. I talk about things like Zipcar, right? If people can't afford to take a loan to buy a new car, well, we've had these businesses that now have adapted where they have models that can get people access to the same types of goods for much less money. And we see this, there's a company called Rent the Runway, which basically rents out fashion. Young people can't afford to go buy dresses for sorority formals, but they can afford to rent them. Global growth, which makes everybody feel badly. What we should learn is that it's not a zero-sum game. When people around the world get rich and make a lot of money, they want to buy what we're selling, and they want to buy the experiences that we make. So we've seen international tourism, which is a huge export industry for us, grow very rapidly. We've seen record numbers of people coming to the U.S. for college education. That's also an export. U.S. companies have been planting their flags in local markets all around the world. So this notion that the fact that the rest of the world is growing more rapidly somehow harms us, there are ways in which that is true, but I think there are more ways in which we as Americans, as companies and consumers, ultimately benefit from that. And I think people forget we live in this era of long business cycles, that expansions can last 6 years, 7 years, 10 years. But during those, we look back and then say, oh, look, the economy was great for that long period of time. But if you look back, there were quarters where we grew at 1% and quarters where we grew at 4%. And so we have this kind of lumpy lurching around that is characteristic of the business cycles we have. So I think the mood is depressed, but it is not purely reflective of the sort of aggregate performance of the U.S. economy over the last few years.